Hi, I'm Dave Price, and it's good to have Tony Houlihan back on the show. Tony, how you doing, sir?
Morning, Dave. Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Good stuff. So, what I wanted to actually delve into today, basically new Labour government, etc., talking about new builds. But just before we go into that, I just thought it'd be really good to get a little bit of background for yourself, for people who haven't actually seen you talk at all. So, can you tell me a little bit of background on what you're up to at the moment?
Yeah, of course I can. My name's Tony Houlihan. I've been investing in property now for just over 10 years. Feels like 20. In that time, I pretty much ticked off every property investment strategy. So buy to let, service accommodation, supported housing, more recently, and I've also done quite a bit of new build.
Right, so quite experienced in the market, to put it lightly. Yeah.
Lots of grey hairs to prove it as well.
Oh, I know the feeling. I've hardly any left at all now, but there we go. Oh, so yeah, so the main thing I wanted to focus on with new builds and new government, new housing targets. Yeah, what's your take on this, Tony?
So, obviously, this has been not unforeseen in terms of the new government coming in. And they started off by making some fairly bold claims in terms of what they're going to do in the housing space. I do think that they're making a lot of the right noises at the minute. I do feel like definitely needs a shake up. They put sort of stakes in the ground with some very ambitious targets to start off with. But a lot of the things that they're saying, for me at the minute, Dave, personally, doesn't have any enough meat on the bones in terms of how they're actually going to do that and how they're going to deliver it. I've been doing new build now probably for about 6 years, all in all.
Right.
And I've sort of been through multiple cycles of planning, funding, building. And a couple of those schemes went through COVID as well. So I've seen some fairly long construction projects and sales issues at the back end and things like that because of the pandemic. So
Right.
I feel like I've seen quite a lot of new build from an SME point of view. But I also know quite a lot of bigger developers, people that work for the big house builders in the past. So I've got a fairly good handle of where the market is and what's going on. And I feel like, the things that they're saying are great, but we need to see some action and some quantifiable things that they're going to actually do before we all start giving them a pat on the back.
Yeah, as you say, it sounds all great ideas at the moment, but how it actually follows through. And the thing is, they seem to be talking about wanting to get individuals like you actually out there developing and building.
Yes, again, for an SME investor, developer, new builds probably one of the things that people aspire to when they start a property investment journey. They see it as like the end goal to be building ground up. And having done pretty much every strategy now, I sort of compare it against most things. And I actually prefer new build to other strategies. I feel like once you're out of the ground, it is much easier. You're less likely to find issues as you're going through the build, etc. And I do think there's a sense of achievement turning an empty field into a housing development, whether that's a couple of units or whether it's 10, 20 units. I feel like that's a fantastic thing to see.
Oh, and something to be really, really proud of, yes. So from the government's perspective, what do you feel they can actually do that would help you go and build more properties as part of their goals?
Yeah, so I feel like there's so many tools that they can employ to support this. Obviously, they all need a level of investment, which I know is tight. They've got other priorities as well as housing, but it's such a massive area and it does contribute to the rest of the economy in such a big way too. From an SME perspective, I feel like, a lot of the big regeneration programs, a lot of the government funding, a lot of the council funding, is always just channeled towards the bigger schemes, the sexier stuff, the town centre region, big apartment blocks, turning the old shopping centres into sort of different things because the high streets changed in terms of what it wants to do. Also got infrastructure investment and stuff that they need to do to support all this. But from an SME perspective, I feel like they could focus on probably 3 or 4 big areas for me.
Okay.
One is sort of, making it easy for people to sort of start a new build, whether that's support, whether that's grants, any incentives they can offer them, even if it's tax relief on, smaller schemes and stuff like that, because it is quite difficult to do the small schemes and make them viable. Anything they could do with that would be helpful from an SME perspective. And we're the guys that are going to be doing the 2, the 5 houses on that infill plot that, the big guys aren't interested in. They want to be doing 50 units. They want to be doing 120 units. They don't want to be touching 3 or 4. That's where the SMEs, I feel, can really step into this.
Yeah.
But, from a perspective of what are the challenges or hurdles that we've faced as an SME developer, probably the first one, and that obviously anyone involved in new build will cite, is planning. So planning issues were notorious. A lot of the planning departments are under-resourced. A lot of them have got clunky systems that don't really work very well. A lot of the policy and processes are very challenging for an SME to navigate, and there's a lot of things that people will avoid doing planning, or they won't want to do new builds as a result of that. So people almost avoid doing it
because of the planning issues they're going to come across.
Yeah, and, the amount of reports they ask for up front and the amount of surveys that you need to do, and there's a lot of upfront cost there for a developer. And if you're an SME, that's a cash flow issue that you don't know how long it's going to take. There's a statutory period that it's supposed to take, but it's very, very good if it takes that long. We've had some schemes that have took 15 months, 16 months. And, they're for like affordable housing schemes that should have been, welcomed by the council. We're adding to the affordable in the region, and they still go through planning, go through committee, just because people, want to have the say and want to, go through everything. And I feel like, a lot of that red tape, bureaucracy could be taken away.
Right. So a reform on the planning side of things would be a key thing for yourselves.
And more planning officers. I think they've come out and said that they'd do 300 new planning officers. I don't know what that is in terms of the delta against how many are already there. But to me, they're not just sat around doing nothing at the minute. Those 300 planning officers are going to have to go through some sort of training, or they're going to have to be brought back in from private sector. They're going to have to do something drastic to get those 300 planning officers in and functioning to actually support the delivery of these 1.5 million houses.
And that's going to take some doing, just finding, recruiting and training 300 planning officers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you've got all into a silhouette. It looks as though we were doing an anonymous interview better. That's getting better.
Yeah, apologies for that. I'm out on the road today and dealing with a couple of issues on site. So we'll do what we can.
Cool. The highs and lows of being a developer. Always something.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we said apart from funding and planning, is there any other issues then the government could do that would actually really directly help yourselves as an SME developer?
I think sort of just support in general. It doesn't have to necessarily be funding for the actual sites. Obviously, there's Homes England that I believe in the last couple of months have sort of stepped back a little bit because they don't know what their function's going to be with the new government coming in. Obviously, they've been prominent in the past in terms of helping developers, but even their processes are quite difficult in terms of borrowing money from them as an SME. It's attractive in terms of finance costs, but actually administering, going through that process is quite difficult for an SME. Another thing that they could potentially do, and it had mixed views from people in the property sector, was bringing back something like Help to Buy. Obviously, that put, you know, that brought a lot of support to the market. But at the minute, we don't need more demand. We need the ability to build more houses. Getting interest rates under control and stuff like that. Obviously, it's been going in the right direction recently. If we continue on that path, then obviously finance costs are going to go down, which will support it as well. And I feel like in the past sort of 12 months, following the impact of the pandemic, labour costs and materials costs have started to normalise as well.
I was going to ask you about this because build costs is obviously going to be a huge thing for a developer. And you've certainly seen some ups and downs over the last couple of years on build costs. What's the situation at the moment from your perspective?
So I do think it's settled quite a bit. I feel like it's getting to the point now where people can commit. But like I said before, when we're talking about the planning, it takes so long to get through planning. It's difficult to know what your build costs are actually going to be when you start building. So it's essential to having robust contingencies and make sure you're using an element of sensitivity analysis in your sort of appraisals at the beginning.
Right. Yeah, because if you price something up, then it takes 18 months to go through planning, then obviously build costs would have increased over that time as well.
And that obviously impacted a lot of people following COVID. They were putting planning applications in and buying sites. And then overnight, due to the increasing costs of both labour and materials, those sites weren't viable anymore.
Yeah. Just because of the delay and then the increase in costs.
Yeah, which is either stopped people from building, people have paused sites. And unfortunately, obviously, some people haven't been able to exit as they planned to originally.
Mm. Yeah, which adds further pressure to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, always going to be a difficult one, the build cost side of things.
Yes. But what's important there, Dave, sorry to interrupt, is make sure you got the right people in your team. So the stuff that we're doing at the minute, we've got an in-house quantity surveyor. But obviously a lot of the people that are stepping into development for the first time won't have that luxury. But it's really important to get a proper QS in your power team, whether they're freelance or in your team. Make sure that you can keep up to date with all the pricing. They know what the market rate is for the labour and stuff like that. So you can make sure that you are getting best value out of everything.
Right. I mean, and how actually do you go about that? Say, if you're putting together a build cost today, but you know it might take 18 months, 2 years before you start the builds, how physically do you keep up with the increases?
So there's a couple of ways of doing it. There's a couple of indexes. So the BCIS, I can't remember, forgive me what that stands for, but it's it's sort of like the national standard for build costs.
Yeah.
And they will do forecasts in terms of ups and downs for certain materials and certain bits of labour. Quite a lot of the finance tools that I use at the minute will tell you where you are in terms of, are you building at the higher end of the average across the country? Are you building at the high end of the average in your region, for instance, which is really useful because if you know that you're way under what everyone else is actually building out at the minute, you know that you've done your sums wrong somewhere.
Alarm bells should be ringing there. Yes.
Absolutely.
But I can understand if you're pricing for something today, but thinking about where prices might be going to in a year or two's time. I mean, do you actually have to do you just put an overall percentage of what you think is going to happen to the build cost, or?
Yeah, that's the only way you can do it, really. It's proper crystal ball stuff, isn't it? But
Yeah.
we factor in an increase year on year, generally when we're doing our stuff. But as I said, we don't have endless reserves of cash. So as an SME, we're always looking for what can we get on site quickly. We'll look to buy sites that have got planning or almost got planning.
Hmm.
And then we can do our numbers with a bit more realism.
Got yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so we were talking about planning and the lack of resources in the planning office, but planning issues themselves and the challenges in overcoming them.
Yes, in terms of what? In terms of
And the sorts of things you're seeing at the moment that are causing you problems on the planning side.
well, the thing I keep mentioning, I sound like a broken record, is the uncertainty of how long it takes from end to end. You know, there's a period of 8 weeks that's supposed to be the norm for smaller schemes. It's a bit more for major schemes because they need to do more consultations, etc. You know, there is a number of schemes that are getting lots of objections at the minute from the sort of people that not anti-development, but people that don't want to see their areas flooded with new housing when they don't believe that there's the infrastructure to do it. That's come up last couple of days in Stockport where I am. People sort of, you know, they're not against new housing, but it's like how are the schools going to support it? How are the transport links going to support it? If you've got a small air road going through your town and someone wants to put another 3,000 houses up there, how are they going to actually deal with that?
Yep, very good point. Yes.
And then again, it's, you know, the costs of it, the actual costs of planning, are relatively reasonable, but it's all the additional information, the surveys, things like that, that they ask for right at the beginning. It'd be good to at least get a favourable idea of whether they like the scheme, whether they're going to do something with it, before you commit to a load of extra cash. Because at the minute, it's a bit like a punt. I'm going to spend 30 grand on this planning application, and I've got no idea, even if it's policy compliant, whether they're going to support it or whether they just come back and reject it.
So you mean, yeah, a lot of capital to gamble on something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, you don't get an indication from the council at all if it's something in principle they'd support, or
So you can go through a pre-app process, and obviously you can use planning consultants. Again, it's additional costs, additional time, all things that SMEs don't really have.
where it could just turn around and be an automatic no, and you just wasted all your money on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, see what you mean. Challenging, yes. So wanted to move on then to actually finding land for developments. How do you go about actually sourcing land like that?
So a lot of the land we come across is brought to us by people who we know. So we're quite aggressive, possibly the word, in terms of networking. So we have lots of contacts across the Northwest. We know a lot of agents. We know a lot of property people, investors, developers. We get a lot of things from investors that maybe don't want to touch new build, they're not interested in it. We have a couple of agents that we know very well that we've done business with in the past, either bought sites off, sold sites with. And, you know, we are getting a lot of opportunities at the minute. And I feel like the market is shifting a little bit in terms of the landowners are being a bit more realistic. When we were looking for housing pre-COVID, so 2018, 2019, when we're looking for housing sites then, everyone wanted, you know, top prices for the land, expecting that, you know, the developers could just going to make a huge profit on every site. And it's not actually the case. Explaining to the landowners that you've done your homework and you know your numbers and that's how much it actually costs to build something, is often sometimes a bit late in the day when an agent sold them a plot of land's worth £1 million.
got that expectation in the head then, yeah.
Absolutely.
And presumably, is it normally a case of you've either got too many land opportunities that you can actually go for, or there's just never enough to go for? What's the sort of feel at the moment?
At the minute, we've probably got 30 opportunities in our pipeline. Some of them pre-planning, so they've not had any planning at all. Some of them have got full planning and ready to go. Again, expectation of the landowners on value is probably the biggest hurdle. But then probably second close, followed closely by funding.
Right. Now, those 30 ones you've got in the pipeline, presumably they're all different stages. How many do you feel percentage-wise would actually go through and end up being a brand new small housing development?
So quite a lot of them they've got schemes drawn up. They may have not been submitted yet, but they've got schemes drawn up, and they're generally small apartment blocks or small housing sites. So we're looking at one at the minute, 7 bungalows. We've got another one that's 4 houses. We had a discussion this week about an apartment scheme that's 23 apartments. So it's a good mix. It tends to be sort of higher end private residential stuff that we look at. So nice houses in nice areas, talking upwards of £300 a square foot in terms of sale values. They're the ones that we tend to be able to make work. It's very difficult to get a new build scheme to work in a lower value area such as East Lancashire because the values per square foot are quite low. So, by the time you've built it, it's worth less than what you can actually sell it for.
Right, but presumably, though, that's really what the government wants to focus on, isn't it? The lower value.
It is, and they're trying to accelerate affordable housing, but the dynamics of the market at the minute, if you don't have the funding and then you're paying top dollar for the land and it takes forever to get through planning, then it's really difficult to make those numbers work without support.
Right. So actually, the affordable housing model itself is just really challenging.
For an SME, yeah. Obviously, there's lots of different registered providers across the country that get this extra level of funding from the government, but even them are struggling to make sites work at the minute.
Yeah. Oh, it's that difference between, a great idea, but then the reality of it.
Yes. Well, that's why we've underperformed for so long in terms of delivery versus expectation.
Yeah. So when you do come across a new potential parcel of lands, how do you actually appraise it?
Okay. So to start off with, we'd follow a fairly high level process initially. So we'd look at the sales values generally. Regardless of what the exit is, we would always look at the sales values because that's what the finance companies will use as the metrics in terms of whether a scheme works or not.
Yeah.
So the sales value when it comes to this stuff is called gross development value. And that's literally house in this area, there's that size, it's going to be worth about £500,000, for example. There's 4 of them. So the gross development value on that scheme is going to be £2 million. We would then look at the other costs. So we would look at the build costs.
So on that, as you say, you can put 4 houses on the plot. Why are you thinking, is there a reason why you go 4 houses rather than 8 houses or a block of 16 flats or yeah.
Yeah, so we'd look at the scheme probably in conjunction with our architect and say, we've got this opportunity. If it's not had a scheme already drawn up, what do we think the best use for this plot is? And they would look at what's around it, what the planning policy is, what the demand is in the area. So, we're looking at some bungalow sites at the minute. Is there a lot of other bungalows around it? Is it going to fit in with the street scene if it's an infill plot? We've got all that sort of stuff to take into consideration. So we generally have, before we start the appraisal process, we'd have a pretty good idea what scheme we think works. And it might be one or two options. So it might be, well, we think five detached houses work, or, it might be 4 blocks of semi-detached.
Hmm. So it's very,
And
very,
we'd see what mix works better in terms of what the demand is in the area, as well as the financial implications.
right. So it's very much down to what's already there in the area, what suits in that area, rather than I want to go and build X number of houses there. It's really got to
Yeah,
be in keeping with what's already there and where the demand is.
absolutely.
Cool. Well, what would be really useful actually is, can you actually just talk us through your first ever new build development?
Yes, can do. So bear with me 1 second. So our first ever new build development was actually 2 detached houses. So we'd actually applied for another site and we're having challenges with planning. So we went and bought a site that had planning in place for 2 new build detached dwellings that was replacing a bungalow.
Right. So knock the bungalow down and put two new builds on there.
Exactly.
Yep.
So that was probably 2019 we did that one.
Okay. And the land on that already had planning permission, so you didn't have all the challenges of going through.
Yeah, so planning was already in place. It was on the market, so we sourced that one on the market on Rightmove. We approached the estate agent, went to meet him a couple of times. We put in some proposals, we put in some offers, and our bid got accepted.
Right. And if you're buying a plot of land like that with existing planning, are you really tied to the planning permission that's been applied for already? Or do you like, oh no, they've got planning for 2, but I think we can go and get 4 on there? Or is there generally a change, or do you normally stick with what's there?
Yeah, so you can potentially change it, but quite a lot of time it means a brand new submission. And the objective for this particular scheme was just to get it off the ground, get up and running, because we were keen to get moving.
Got yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. But sorry, just on that point, is things that land sellers do that actually really frustrate you, apart from wanting too much money for the land?
Apart from wanting too much money, yeah. Yeah, so there is, if you're a landowner, and generally a lot of these plots are inherited or they had something else on before, they will literally go to an architect because that's what everyone thinks is the right thing to do. And they will go and get a scheme drawn up and they will say, I've got this field, I've got this plot of land, put some houses on it, and then we're going to sell it. What a lot of the time we find is no consideration put into the viability. So the scheme's drawn up, and absolutely anyone could put planning in. You could put planning in. I could put planning in. I could put a layout in. Don't have to be qualified. I can just draw some buildings on a piece of paper and submit it to planning. But if consideration was taken earlier on into the viability, into the feasibility of the scheme, then there'd be a lot more opportunities for people to be able to start straight away. So you do find plots with planning that you need to change a load of things on. On our first development, actually, I think we ended up changing the roof design based on our contractor's advice to make it more cost effective to build, because they've done some nice design features, but they actually weren't that practical to actually deliver.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, if somebody's actually thinking of selling a plot of land and the view is, yeah, well, I'll go and get planning permission first, because then it's going to give it more value. Are you, yeah, great, go ahead and do that. Or would it be better to actually start chatting to an estate agent and potentially developers before they start going down that planning route?
Yeah, so one of the services we offer at the minute is that consultation. So it's let's have a look at it holistically. Let's look at the agent's valuations. Obviously, they've got a motive. They want to sell lots of houses. They want to sell them at the highest value. They want to get the listings. So we tend to find agents' valuations for new build at the beginning of the scheme tend to be on the high side.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the banks and the valuation companies don't approach it quite the same way, and they'll look at it the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
What we try and do is give people pragmatic advice in terms of values. What's going to happen if it hits that range of value? What happens if it hits that range of value? What sort of product do you need to be delivering to achieve that value? So it's all well and good saying the average in an area is £500 a square foot, which would be a very high end valuation up north. It's what finish do you need to achieve? What fixtures and fittings are you putting in? What do people expect that are paying that kind of money? They want up-fly kitchens, they want Nef kitchens, appliances, things like that. So, we can help with all that. And it's not just about here's the scheme, chuck it into planning and sell it. We can actually help people look at it and go, well, actually, if you put 6 houses on here as opposed to 8 that are a different size, that actually works out better for the developer. So they're going to get more return from their investment. So they'd be willing to pay an uplift for the land.
Right. So really useful if you can actually talk to the landowner from day one before they start going.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. No, that makes total sense. Cool. So you were saying about your first development then. So bought the land, bungalow on there, needed to be dropped, and 2 houses. Sounds great. How did it go?
Actually, that one, in all of our new build developments, probably one of the best, considering it was the first. So we employed a local contractor. We financed that using private investment. So we had a JV partner involved in this one. And we did a little bit of design changes throughout the process, but then we built it around about on time. I think it was something like 10 to 12 months that it took to build. 2,000 square foot houses, very nice area, part of South Manchester near the airport. And then we were coming to finish them. Quite a good product. Quite pleased with how everything turned out. The quality was really good. The workmanship was good. And then COVID came.
Right.
And the estate agents we were using as our sales agent at the time physically had one branch. They were local independent, quite well respected in the area, but they actually closed the shop for a number of weeks, which obviously caused us a little bit of stress at the time with 2 brand new properties to try and sell.
Just sitting there doing nothing, costing you money.
Yes.
Well, what was actually the exit strategy in the end? Was it just to sell both of those?
Or? So it was sales on that particular scheme, yeah.
Right. Because I would have just guessed that was the automatic exit strategy for what you do, just build and then sell. But have you got different exits when you're looking at these?
Yeah, so I feel like you always need more than one exit when you enter into any property project. You need to understand what your other options are. Obviously, in that instance, if we'd have had to keep them, which was something that went through our minds when COVID turned up, your second exit for those properties was rental. So they would have commanded a high rent, but that wouldn't have necessarily meant they were a good investment. So it wouldn't have been something you'd have gone to build. A lot of the regeneration stuff, a lot of the city centre stuff and town centre stuff at the minute, it's being built out on a build to rent basis because in those areas, the sales values don't necessarily support new build development. So, for instance, Stockport, where I am, Capital and Centric, are building 320 flats. The council have got a JV with another developer that are doing 200 flats. All those are built to rent because they can actually afford to forecast it over a longer term. So they can get some capital appreciation. They don't need all the money back straight away. So they don't need to hit all the profit metrics on day one of completing the scheme.
Right. Presuming if you're going to build to rent, it's generally lower value properties you go for, such as flats, rather than the big 2,000.
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, single family build to rents, not that big in the UK at the minute. It's quite big in the States. But you need to be a big company to be doing that sort of stuff. It doesn't really work at the SME end.
Got yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So have you actually ever done any developments where you haven't just sold them on, where you have actually kept them either through design or through circumstance?
So circumstances, definitely. Never done it through design. So we ended up building 2 townhouses in Fallowfield that we ended up having to keep. Again, that was another scheme that was built out during COVID. We're actually halfway through when COVID came. And just because of the state of the market, when we finished them, we decided to keep them long term.
Right, so those you just renting out and holding.
We actually kept them as service accommodation in the end. So
Oh, right.
we were renting them out on a short term basis.
Got you. Yep. No, it makes total sense. Um, so the idea, as you say, you got a contractor in on the first development you did to build those two houses. And different contractor approaches, how you find the right contractor. I mean, it sounds a huge risk to take. You know,
Yeah. So I'm a procurement person by background, so I'm used to picking and choosing suppliers for different things.
right.
So I guess if my advice to people that want to develop new build that are looking for a contractor, sort of processes I'd go through, need to undertake thorough due diligence on any of the contractors that you're looking at potentially using. You need to be going to market with a defined scope of works, a robust contract, things like that. And you really need to have on your side a quantity surveyor for that. So they can design the contract, they can design the tender documents, they can ensure that everything's been priced like for like, so you end up with no nasty surprises. Obviously, there's things that can crop up throughout the build program, things like ground issues or unexpected circumstances. But in the main, if you've got a robust scope of works and bill of quantities up front, then you should have a better idea of where your costs are actually going to turn out. And go into market, and depends on, obviously there's different contracting models as well as just a main contractor where you literally give the site to one party. You can divide the packages and give it to plumbing contractor and electrical contractor, for example. That people try and do that a lot of the time to save money. But if you don't do that efficiently, then it's not always the case that that's going to be a cheaper option.
It's one of those ones that you can see the logic as in, well, I'll just project manage it and get all of the different trades in. But unless you've got a lot of experience in that, I would have thought that's potentially going to open up a nightmare that could even cost more than getting one contractor just to do the whole thing.
Absolutely. And it only takes one bad contractor to affect the whole project. So, there's a lot of interdependencies in building. New build's no different. You need everyone to be working to the same program. You need everyone to have the right capacity. You need everyone to have the right experience and skills. You can pick a very professional looking, well-established electrical contractor, but if you end up with the two guys that aren't any good, then that's going to affect your whole project.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. So what are the main sort of challenges people have with contractors just generally for something like this? Is there a common?
Yeah, so I would say probably programs, probably the number one issue. People running over. Obviously, when you're either investing your own cash or you're borrowing money, whether that be from an investor or through development finance, every week, every month, costs you money out of your profit. So making sure that bill is on time. And there's things like, even the weather. We've had an awful summer. So, the roof works might not have got done on some of our projects for weeks and weeks because it's just been tipping it down and it's not ideal for doing certain things. Like bricklaying's another example of that. So there's some things like that, but then if they're running the rest of the program on time and efficient and you've got a little bit of contingency, then most of the things you can get back. But I'd say that's probably the number one issue. Second is sort of reliability.
just on that, because from a layman's perspective, I would have thought they'd say, well, don't you just put in a some sort of fine or whatever if they go over timescale, so the builder starts paying. I mean, is that a realistic strategy?
It's an interesting comment, Dave. So liquidated damages is probably the most commonly used term for this. And if someone's late, they will pay a certain amount per week. And that's representative of the amount of money that it's costing you. So if you do this on a commercial development, for instance, and you were opening a hotel, sometimes your liquidated damages could be quite high because it's costing them a lot of revenue than not being open on time.
Yeah.
In sort of housing and stuff, it's a bit more difficult to quantify what's your realistic cost rather than it being a penalty. So your realistic costs could be cost you of interest that you're incurring as they be late. We've actually got a couple of our smaller builders on that at the moment, which is quite rare. But we like to incentivize our guys as well, so it's not all punishment for being late. If they're early and they bring it in on time ahead of schedule, then they've saved us money. We like to offer some of that back.
Right. So you actually see it as a two-way thing.
Yeah, the whole thing has to be, otherwise, you generate the wrong behaviours, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say because it sounds nice and easy just to penalise a builder if it goes over timescales, but as you say, there's so many things outside of their control, just the weather.
And at the end of the job, are they making profit? Are they trying to get off on other jobs? People rushing at the end of it impacts the quality. Do you really want them rushing to finish your job? Because that difference in finish, that quality could get you the extra 2%, 3% on your sales value, which would make much more benefit to hitting them over the head.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's not quite as straightforward as it sounds.
Absolutely.
Got ya. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And funding, how are you finding funding new builds at the moment?
So over the last couple of years, it's got more expensive, obviously, with interest rates going up. And finance isn't a standard product across the industry. There's obviously so many different lenders and brokers in the market. And obviously we've got in property quite prevalent is private investment. So if I sort of take the sort of professional lenders, the banks, and the sort of mainstream sort of big lenders, at the minute that market is quite buoyant. There's plenty of cash floating around for the right schemes. People are being a little bit more cautious in terms of the values that they'll lend against.
Yeah.
So pre-COVID, you could borrow quite easily 75% of the GDV from a lender. We're now seeing those more realistically between 60 and 65 because people are taking that risk. So what that means for an investor or a developer, it means you end up putting more of your own cash in. In terms of rates, the rates are, anywhere between 10% and 14% for mainstream lending at the minute. So again, it's a significant cost. When I started developing in 18, you could get Homes England money for about 6%, and sort of development finance lenders were probably between 7 and 9. So it's been a big increased cost on top of the sort of materials and labour challenges that we've already mentioned.
It is. I was going to say, because a lot of just property investors, we're so used to mortgage rates. You're looking at 5 or 6%, but when you're looking at 10+% for developments, it's like,
over an 18-month period, that's adding up to quite a big cost.
Yeah, with no income coming in over that 18 months either at all.
Mm-hmm.
So would you normally do you say you work with private investor finance? Is that to sort of like get 30% or so from private investors and then go to the mainstream lenders?
Yeah, so there's various things that we've done. So sometimes just for the equity element, as you've just mentioned. So potentially private finance that if you don't have your own capital. So that tends to be at a higher rate, obviously, because that's the risky element of the lending. That's not got security generally, or it's got lesser security. So that could be anywhere from sort of 10% up to sort of 20-25%.
Wow.
But it tends to be on a smaller amount. So your overall cost doesn't change a lot, but that actually facilitates more schemes to be delivered. And if there's enough profit in it in the main to deal with that, then it should be viable. But again, everything needs to be stress tested. Everything needs to be worked out on a sensitivity basis. What happens if it takes 3 months longer? What happens if your sales values drop by 10%? What happens if your build cost goes up by 20%? All those things need factoring in. And, if you do all those things properly, it does mean that you get much less schemes to work. But that's the point of doing it properly.
Yeah, knowing from the outset what's going to work rather than when you put your money in and then realise it's not going to work.
And then hope for the best. Yeah.
Cool. So that's the building side of it. And then what about marketing the new build properties?
So again, I feel like this is very underestimated in terms of the different things that you need to do to market a new property. So, straightforward terraced house, semi-detached house on an established estate, quite happily walk into most mainstream estate agents, get a valuation, pick one that you like the look and feel of. They put it on Rightmove, they put some nice copy around it, some nice imagery, and if they have a decent sales and marketing process, shouldn't have any problem. I feel like new build, you've got to be a little bit smarter, you've got to be a little bit cleverer. Depending on the size of the scheme, you should have a budget, regardless of what the scheme is. But you need to be looking at things like brochures, electronic, maybe landing pages, things like that. Maybe telling the story of the development as it goes through. So on some developments, we've used sort of like time-lapse videos to sort of show things being built. We can use photographs on social media, weekly updates, fortnightly updates, that sort of thing, sort of drive people to be interested to follow the houses being built. But again, when you're actually close to coming to market, it's, are you going to use a show home? Are you going to, just sell them as they are? Obviously, a lot of the big house builders will invest heavily on a show home on a big estate. An SME doesn't have the luxury of being able to spend 40, 50 grand on a house just to put some nice feature walls in and some furniture and stuff like that, because the economics don't work. But are you going to use a staging company? Are you going to get some proper photography? Are you going to try and use a new build specialist marketing agent, for example? So there's lots of things that you can do to elevate your marketing. But again, I feel like it's very underestimated how much work and time you need to put into that. A lot of people think that you just build the house, and as long as the house looks nice, it's just going to sell. Not quite the case.
Yeah, as you said, I just assumed you go to a local estate agent, put it in the window, and that's it. But it sounds as though you're actually doing a lot of marketing yourself before the properties are actually ready.
Yeah, and a lot of that's development specific, I think. The likes of Barrett's and Bellway and places like that have huge marketing departments, sales departments, because of the volume that they're doing. But just because you're an SME doesn't mean you shouldn't overlook that. And, you're buying land at a certain level, you're building at a certain level. The power of your sales and marketing can make a massive difference to your profit at the back end. So it's no good buying your land cheap, delivering it really efficiently, but having bad sales and marketing at the end.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It must be a weird one though, because if you're putting time and money in to do your own marketing when you're developing the scheme, and then if the new sales just come through in estate agents, you're like, my God, have I just wasted that time marketing? How do you feel about that?
It's difficult. So, I'm a big believer in early appointment of an estate agent that's in line with you, that can collaborate the whole way through. So we work with a number of agents, particularly that are very good at new build, that are very good at certain types of development. And we would select an agent to work with us on that basis.
Right, so you're actually getting the agent involved much earlier. I was assuming you wouldn't talk to the agent until you've got a house ready to.
Yeah, no, we do that very early, even at point of sort of looking to buy a site.
Right. Again, I take it they can help with feasibility of future projects.
Absolutely. Like I said at the beginning, they're optimistic, but as long as you temper that a little bit, and you know, the good agents can tell you, well, actually, I don't think you should put semis on here. I think you should put detached. Or we've got a massive demand in this area for bungalows, as an example. So why don't you do a bungalow scheme? You know, that local knowledge is really powerful. But I guess my sort of warning comment is just take it with a pinch of salt.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably going to be on the high side, shall we say?
Yes.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. Yeah. Cool. No, it's been brilliant talking to you about this. What I want to ask is, what over the next 5 years, what do you think the future is actually going to look like? These promises from the government, is any of this going to happen? And what are the plans for yourselves over the next 5 years?
Yeah, so I feel like the proof's in the pudding, Dave. Like I said, they're making some big claims at the moment. We need to see that transfer into action. You know, these planning promises that they're making, the new planning officers. Let's see some actual reporting about what they've done about it. Let's see some progress. Let's see some, you know, improved statistics in terms of planning applications, outstanding, actual time for the planning permissions to be granted. You know, are these things that are saying actually transferring 1.5 million new houses over the next 5 years is a big challenge. They're not going to do 300 a year, that's for sure. But they need to put the plans in place now to deliver 350, 400, 450, 500, in my view, to make those numbers actually become real. And we'll start to see very soon whether they're going to do it or not.
I was going to say, I mean, I've got it in. Do you know how many houses we're building on average over the last 5, 10 years or so?
It's below 200,000. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's nowhere near 300.
Yeah, that's why I had in my head under just under 200 or so.
Yeah.
And as you say, by the time they actually ramp it up, it's not going to
Exactly. It's like a hockey stick. So they need to be doing stuff now. It's not going to be 300, 300, 300. But yeah, they need to get moving. And you know, if we see that action, then everyone will get back behind and support them, hopefully.
Yeah, that's the thing. We want to see the action. And what about for yourselves anyway over the next 5 years?
So you know, we're looking at new build sites at the minute. We've been struggling to make things work over the last couple of years because of build costs, labour costs.
Yeah.
Do think landowner expectations are a bit more realistic. So this year we're looking to do, there's 3 schemes that we've already got in our pipeline that we're either delivering for other people or we're delivering ourselves, hoping to secure a couple more before the end of the year. But I think over the next 3 to 4 years, our focus is going to switch more to new builds, probably build to sell as a preferred exit. So yeah, we're always looking for new sites and new people to work with us. So if anyone that's watching has got a plot of land that they don't know what to do with, or looking for some advice in terms of how to build it out or what type of development, we're always open to those conversations to see where they might lead.
Cool, love it. And just to remind everybody again, come and talk to you. And it's Tony Houlihan at Aligned Property Services.
Here, Dave. Thanks very much. Love the chat.
Brilliant stuff. Good talking to you, mate. Catch you soon.
See ya.
Cheers. Bye.